marketing specialist at QNAP, and I'm here with our product manager, Deval.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're going to be getting into QNAP's new ZFS-based OS, QuTS Hero. We're going to be talking about some things like inline deduplication, compression, and ZFS snapshot, just to name a few. So to kick things off, we're going to be talking about QuTS Hero, what it does. We'll then take a closer look at some of the unique features of the new OS, followed by a couple of demos that Deval is going to show us to give us a kind of hands-on look at what this looks like in action. And then we'll wrap things up by giving you a glance at some of our featured QuTS Hero pre-installed models. So what is QuTS Hero? It's basically our standard operating system, except with one very key difference. Rather than running on the ext4 file system, QuTS Hero is running the ZFS file system. And why this is significant is that there's a host of enterprise storage features that are supported natively on ZFS. Features that facilitate greater data integrity, increased storage efficiency and reliability, and all of this will be available while maintaining the convenience of the standard QuTS features that we've grown accustomed to. Because in the past, our ZFS-based solutions were only available on the highest end models, and they ran a very different operating system. And so we wanted to bring a solution that could support a wider scale of users to facilitate greater efficiency for the storage, greater data security, and greater system stability. So let's look at a few of these features. So increasing data efficiency, ZFS supports inline compression and inline deduplication. And so this actually deduplicates or compresses or both the data before writing it to the drives. So this is going to save space on your drives. Obviously, you can get your data to the drives quicker since you're writing less data, and it's also less wear and tear on the drives. Additionally, the ZFS supports caching on your NAS's RAM, so that can increase your performance. And we include ZIL logging to keep a log of the data that is cached on the RAM. So to protect your data, we have the ZFS snapshot. Now, the ext4 that runs on the standard QuTS doesn't natively support snapshot, but we actually created our own snapshot for the standard QuTS. But that snapshot, it maxes out at 1,024 snapshots. So with the ZFS snapshot, you're actually going to be able to take over 65,000 snapshots. So potentially you can have more versions of your data, perhaps lower your RPO, and you can just really customize your snapshots. Additionally, we have RAID 7 support. If you're familiar with RAID 5 or 6, basically RAID 5 dedicate one drive to redundancy, RAID 6 dedicates 2 drives to redundancy. With RAID 7, it's similar, but it dedicates 3 drives to redundancy. And then we also include worm support. So for certain businesses, perhaps law enforcement, there may be certain legal requirements or regulations. So what worm is it's write once, read many. So once you write data to the NAS, you can't just go in and delete it really easily. So it can protect you against accidental deletion or someone going in and tampering with the data. So that could be a very important feature for certain businesses. In terms of data integrity, ZFS can actually self-correct if there's, a bit goes wrong or a miswrite or something. ZFS can actually self-heal the data if there's some type of data corruption type issue. To keep the system stable, a couple of our pre-installed QuTS Hero models will feature ECC RAM, and so that's basically an error correcting RAM. So if something goes wrong with the data on the RAM, that RAM can actually heal itself or correct it. We also are supporting resilvering RAID with the QuTS Hero NAS. And what that does is if a drive fails and you're replacing the drive, you only have it only has to rebuild the bad blocks of data. And so this is going to make your RAID rebuilds much faster, and obviously that will reduce your risk of a second or third drive failing. So that's going to bring a lot of added security. And then with drive lifespan prediction, we collaborated with another company that has a software that uses artificial intelligence to analyze the drive activity and can actually make predictions about the lifespan of a drive if it looks like a drive might fail. And so this can help you prepare for that ahead of time. And then additionally, unlike our QES ZFS OS, QTS Hero is very similar with the standard QTS just based on ZFS. So all of the standard apps that you have on the regular QTS will still be available, and it's still the basic QTS OS. And so Deval is actually going to give us a closer look at some of these features.
All right, thank you very much, Cody. As Cody was mentioning, we have I'm going to point out some major features from ZFS operating system, like compression, deduplication, the new RAID, self-healing, and the rebuild time. So starting with compression, an absolute killer feature of ZFS is the ability to add compression with little hassle. Combine that with ZFS SIM provisioning. This is a must-do option to get more performance and better disk space utilization. Many workloads work really well with ZFS compression.
What compression algorithm does QTS Hero use?
QTS Hero uses LZ4 for compression. LZ4 is a lossless data compression algorithm that is focused on compression and decompression speeds. With LZ4, you get a lower CPU usage compared to something like GZIP7, which is another algorithm, which helps in saving more CPU, so you have more CPU resources available for your other workloads. So LZ4 really helps speed up your compression and decompression speeds, and with keeping low CPU usage, so you have low I/O wait times to get more performance out of your CPU.
All right.
All right. So the next we'll be looking at deduplication. QuTS Hero offers something called inline deduplication, which means that your deduped data is cached for better performance by reducing disk access. Deduplication is best used for VM deployment, as it gives you a high rate of disk savings than other scenarios. There's another file system called BTRFS, which uses out-of-band dedupe, which involves the kernel, and it always happens on mounted file system. What it means is that BTRFS searches for data that is already stored on your NAS for identical data, and then it performs deduplication, which is a very inefficient way to perform that option. One thing to note is that deduplication uses a lot of RAM. So if you're planning to use this feature, make sure you install more RAM. 32 gigabytes of RAM is highly recommended for deduplication. Okay.
And can you use compression and deduplication at the same time?
Yes, you can. And this will actually help you save more data on your NAS. Also, if you're using an all-flash NAS, it also helps increase the SSD life, as the data written on the SSD is much smaller with compression and deduplication compacting your data. So because ZFS uses inline compression as well as inline deduplication, so when the data comes in from outside, the ZFS will first compact it by performing compression and deduplication on the RAM side, and then the smaller data is written onto the drive. This actually helps saving SSD life, because the actual data that is written on the drive is much smaller compared to what it's supposed to write. Okay.
Wow.
All right, so the next is the RAID. With QuTS Hero, with ZFS, you already have access to all the current RAID support, such as RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 6. But with that, we also have a new RAID called RAID 7 that supports 3 drive redundancy. With RAID 7, you can actually lose up to 3 drives at the same time and still have access to your data. This actually works great in a scenario that data is really critical, and you do not want to lose data because you have at least 3 drives to lose before you can actually lose data. So yeah, RAID 7 is the new RAID support we have.
Awesome. So a little more protection there.
All right. And the next is self-healing. ZFS prevents silent data corruption by writing a checksum with every block of data. Both data and metadata is written onto the drive. It also has the ability to automate silent self-healing of data inconsistencies. Here's a simple example of RAID 1. As you can see, ZFS writes data on both the disks. It checks for checksum, and if the data is corrupted, ZFS would then copy the data from the mirrored drive to repair the data, and this all happens automatically.
So will it still be necessary to run file system checks on QTS Hero?
No. So with QuTS Hero, you no longer need to perform any file system check to prevent any corruption, adding a layer of data protection. Actually, with QuTS Hero, you do not even have an option to perform a file system check any longer. So with QTS, we used to have a file system check button. With QuTS Hero, with ZFS, that option is no longer available.
Okay, so you don't even have to worry about it.
Yes. All right, and the last option we'll be looking at is RAID rebuild. With ZFS resolver option, you can now rebuild much faster depending upon the amount of data stored on the NAS. Rebuild in ZFS only happens for data blocks that are needed to be rebuilt. So not the whole disks is needed to be rebuilt, cutting the rebuild time in a matter of minutes. So for example, if you have a NAS which has 3 2 terabyte disks in a RAID 5 configuration, so the usable space is 4 terabyte, but you only have stored 100 gigabytes of data onto those 2 terabyte storage space. I'm sorry, 4 terabyte storage space. In this scenario, when a disk is replaced, ZFS resolver should rebuild within an hour, whereas in the same scenario on other operating system without the ZFS resolver would take many hours because it has to rebuild the whole 2 terabyte instead of just the 100 gigabytes of data that you have stored on that device.
Wow. So we know that typically with larger drives, with the older RAID rebuild, it would take longer to rebuild because the drives were larger. But now with this RAID rebuild, is size of the disk going to impact the rebuild time at all?
No, as resolver does not rebuild the disks block, so only the data blocks that you have stored on the NAS would have to be rebuilt. So for example, in the same scenario, if you have a 16 terabyte disk in a RAID 5 configuration, and if a disk, and you only have, let's say, 100 gigabytes of data stored, the same scenario as before, even on this scenario, it should only take an hour or so to rebuild that 100 gigabytes, even though you're still using 16 terabytes. Because again, as I mentioned, it only rebuilds that 100 gigabytes data instead of the whole 16 terabytes. So that actually gives you much faster rebuild times. So in this scenario, losing another disk in rebuild process is the chances of losing another disk in rebuild process is much less compared to another operating system because the rebuild time is much smaller compared to something like if you're on a different operating system, rebuilding 16 terabyte would take more than 8 hours. In that 8 hours of constant spinning disk at full speed, another disk failing, chances of another disk failing is high. With ZFS, that is much smaller.
Yeah,
all right.
That's great. So Deval's going to take us into a demo now to give us a look at what this actually looks like in the OS.
Perfect. So let me change my screen. All right. All right, so you guys can see the screen right now?
I see it.
Okay, so I'm going to log into one of the QuTS Hero NASs we have here. All right, so it's a similar login process as the QuTS NAS. Now, if you're going to see, you can see the interface looks similar to QTS, the QTS NAS that we have already. So if you look at the control panel options, it's going to be very similar to what you're used to already. So the learning curve of this new operating system is much smaller because everything remains the same. Only few changes will be under storage and snapshots. That will be the major change that we have on this particular operating system. Okay, so I'm going to go through from some of the options so you can see how similar it is with QTS. So we have all these users remains the same, shared folder remains the same, network services remains. We have all these protocols that we do support. Network and virtual switch is also being ported over to QuTS 0, which also remains the same. You have all these options like virtual switch, DHCP server, DDNS is all being ported over. So again, it's very, very similar to QTS, the QTS NAS that we have already with ext4 file system. Now, one major changes we have done on QTS 0 is under shared folder permissions. Now, if you remember on QTS, we used to have Windows ACL as another option, but with QTS 0 NAS, ACL is natively supported. So you do not need to actually enable that option. That option is already there. And then if you want to, let's say if you want to edit properties of a shared folder, now you have your basic permissions that we have with read only, deny access, but we also now have Windows permissions that you can actually do from here directly. You do not need to have a Windows computer to perform ACL permissions. So you can have your full control, modify, read, and delete. All those Windows permissions are now ported over. This is for local groups as well as your domain users and computers that if you have this NAS joined to a domain computer. So that's another great feature and a difference between QTS and QTS 0. Okay, so now the major changes we have done, again, as I mentioned, is under storage and snapshots. All right, so if you can see here, the interface looks similar. So if you have all your options like a disk and virtual JBOD, they can see all your options, and you have your disk information available already. We have smart information available. Then the storage and snapshots. Right here is the major changes we have done. With ZFS, there's another update that you do not need to create a volume anymore. So that particular layer is completely eliminated. So only thing you have to do is create a storage pool. And if you want to create a shared folder, you actually create it directly on top of the storage pool. There's no longer need of a volume. So it actually improves the performance because now everything is block-based storage. And also, if you want to create an iSCSI, it also goes directly on top of the storage pool. Okay, so let's create a storage pool for an example. So right here, you select your disk. It's a similar process. You select all your RAIDs. See all your RAIDs. You have all these options available, and then select next. If you have SSD, then you set up your over provisioning and your alert threshold, and that's it. So you create your storage pool right there. Now, if you want to create a shared folder, you just click on create shared folder, and then you just name your shared folder. And here, you can actually set up a compression and deduplication if you like to. Then again, you set up your SIG and SIM provisioning. It's similar to creating a volume, but now you're creating a shared folder instead of a volume. And then we do have options for performance option profiles. If you're using this for, let's say, for editing, video editing, or if you're using it in a virtual environment, you select what performance profile you like, and then once you select all that options, you set up your privilege settings, and then you have your folder encryption, which is your encryption that we used to have a volume-based encryption. Now it's more folder-based encryption only. And also you can set up here warm, which is write once, read many. So once you write data on here, you cannot delete the data until you specify that, and you have these options here. And again, your regular options that you used to have in QTS, it's all available here. So once you have all these options configured, you create. Okay. So another feature of ZFS is you can enable and disable compression and deduplication on the go. So you do not need to delete. Let's say if you do not want to use deduplication, you do not need to actually delete the whole folder. You just enable and disable it from here, and your new data that you store now will not be deduplicated or will be deduplicated depending upon the option you enable or disable. Okay, same with compression. If you enable compression, the new data will be compressed, and if you disable it, your new data will be not compressed. So this is available for your new data. Okay. Another great feature for ZFS is native snapshot support. So with native snapshot support, the snapshot interface is similar to what we have on QTS NAS, but this is natively coming from ZFS. So you have more snapshots that you can actually save on the QTS Hero NAS. So you have up to over 65,000 snapshots that you can actually take on QuTS Hero NAS. So you can have more versioning of your data, and you can revert back to older versions. And this is a great tool for your protection to protect yourself from ransomware. Okay, and so again, the interface is similar to QTS. So if you want to restore something, you can restore. You can select your versions. You can restore the whole folder. So you can revert the folder snapshot, or you can revert a particular data inside that particular snapshot. So you do not need to. You can restore smaller amounts of data instead of the whole data as well. So you can restore the whole snapshot folder or whole folder that you want to restore on previous point of time, or you can, if you deleted some data within that folder, you can just recover that particular small part of the data. So this is another great feature from QTS. Again, this is similar to QTS NAS, not major difference. The only major difference is over 65,000 snapshots are now supported with this. Okay. Another changes we have done in cache acceleration. Now, for cache acceleration, we now have ZFS cache acceleration support. So you have your read cache, and then we have read and write log. So, if you want to select your disks, you can set up your read cache, or you can set up read and write cache, read and write log cache log. And then so you select next, you can figure for which storage you want, for which folder you want to cache that data. And then once you select next, you just create your cache. So this is your SSD cache that we ported over, but it's now natively supported from ZFS. All right, and then your iSCSI and Fiber Channel remains the same. This NAS, so we will have Fiber Channel support for this particular operating system. Unlike the other, unlike QES, right now we do not have Fiber Channel support for that particular device, but we do have Fiber Channel support for QTS and for QTS Hero NAS. So, and then we also have iSCSI support for QTS Hero NAS as well. So here, the options remain the same. You create your new iSCSI target that you want to create. And next, if you want to use chat authentication, you can use that. And then I'm going to click on apply. And then this is where you're going to be selecting your this is where you're going to be creating iSCSI LUN. It's a different process because now as you're creating directly on the storage pool, which you can actually do on QTS too, but now you have the option of setting up compression and deduplication on iSCSI volumes as well. So iSCSI LUNs as well, I'm sorry. So you can set up your compression and deduplication or iSCSI LUNs, and you can set up an SSD cache as well. And you can set up your performance blocks for iSCSI LUNs as well. So once you select that, you can set up same provisioning, set up your storage capacity, and then you can create. This is easy. This is how easy it is to create an iSCSI LUN on ZFS operating system or QTS Hero operating system, right? And the last thing I want to go over is the benefits of using compression and deduplication. So what I have done is I have installed virtualization station. This is just a brief demo or a brief example of how compression deduplication may help you in your scenario, especially when you're using it for VDI environments or virtualization environments. So in virtualization, I have two operating system, different operating NASs here. One is on QTS Hero-based NAS, and then one is our regular QTS NAS that we have, and I have created same exact virtual machines on both these devices and with same exact setup. So if you can see here, I have I think up to 4 different operating systems here, and those again are same exact setup. I've just gone through the initial setup with using the same ISO, same exact setup, like 2 cores, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and same setup. I've been through same ISOs I've used on both different operating systems or both different NASs. And so if you look at the storage capacity that you have used on deduplication, give me 1 second. Oh, I'm sorry. So right here, so if you can see, the QTS NAS that's based on ext4 format is using up to 52 gigs of storage space on QTS, which is based on ext4. Now, if you look at the same exact storage capacity for QTS2, it's only using 42 gigs of data. So again, it's the same exact setup that I've used on both NASs with the same exact ISO files, but because of using compression and deduplication on those folders. So if you look at the setup here, I'm using compression and deduplication on the QTS Hero NAS. So it's only using up to 4 gigabytes of data on that particular folder. So it's much smaller data that's stored on QTS Hero compared to QTS NAS. Okay, and that will be it for demos. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Deval. So we did want to touch on the QTS Hero models, just so that we can make sure that the QTS Hero is rolled out well and stable and everything. Right now, we have 5 models that have released that are pre-installed with QTS Hero, specifically made for this OS. In the future, we are going to open up licensing for other QNAP NAS models, but for right now, it's these 5. And so if we take a look here, these are the rack mount models. We have both Intel Xeon and AMD Ryzen models, and it comes with 8 gigabytes of ECC RAM in the Xeon, and then we have 128 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM in the 1277XU and 32 gigabytes in the 977XU. And you know, like we've mentioned, if you're going to be doing a lot of deduplication, we do recommend you have a lot of RAM. So even though that 1283XU is only 8 gigabytes, you can expand that up to 64. And then if we look at the tower models, they're both the Xeon D processor, and you have in the 6 bay the 8 gigabytes of ECC RAM, and then in the 8 bay, and that's 2 plus the 6 2.5 inch base. That is in the 8 bay we have 16 gigabytes of the ECC RAM, but like the others, it is up to 128. So you can expand your RAM up to 128 gigabytes, and that could be recommended if you're going to be doing a ton of deduplication.
I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us for the webinar. For more information, feel free to reach out to us at usasales@qnap.com.